Next on this list is a game that is the first simulation game for the system in North America, but also the first that was originally a PC game but would go straight to home consoles, and that's game number 17, Theme Park, based on the original 1994 PC game of the same name. And the developers would go on and later make one of the best PC games of 1997, Dungeon Keeper. Published by Electronic Arts and Bullfrog Productions, and developed by also Bullfrog Productions and Chrysalis Software. The main focus of the game is about building your own theme park, where you just start just one theme park in the United Kingdom, but sooner or later your parks will expand on multiple countries, in total 24. Which are the already mentioned UK, but also Greenland, Alaska, Northern USA, Eastern USA, California, Peru, Brazil, Argentina, Iceland, Scandinavia, Europe, Egypt, Nigeria, South Africa, Antarctica, Yakutsk, Russia, China, Japan, Kuwait, India, Australia, and New Zealand. However, it's not an easy task to just simply make a park and move on to another one. You need to know how much it costs, since it has a money system and also a perfect amount of customers spending like foods, rides, and more. Then you'll have a meeting with another businessman trying to arrange an agreement to share half of the profits. Then you can agree or disagree. And finally, the bill of the total cost of the park, and that's about it. Can you raise amount of cash and build a multinational theme park across all over the world? In real life, no. But in video game, maybe. Its development history all started with only one man, and that man was Peter Molyneux. When he was young, he was obsessed with a little arcade game simply called Pong, which was still new back in the early 70s, and sooner or later got a home computer, to be more specific, Commodore PET/CBM, and ever since he got more into computers as years go by, and started to do coding on a computer, which he gets better at it. By the time when he hit adulthood in his 20s with his business partner, Les Edgar, he set up a company called Tyrus Software, which they export money systems to slot machines and baked beans to the south. Yeah, kinda bizarre for a company to start out. Eventually, they did get its break when Commodore contacted Taurus to set a spreadsheet of software for the upcoming Amiga by accident. Why? Because Commodore contacted the wrong company, wanted Taurus instead of Tyrus, due that they have the same beginning letter and pronounce much similar to these two. But they eventually sort this out, and the company made its first game, Acquisition, which was a hit for the Amiga computers. Eventually, Taurus focused more on making games, and by the time the late 80s hit, they changed their names to Bullfrog Productions. Some of its earlier works became classics during the late 80s and early 90s, like Fusion, Populous 1 and 2, and Syndicate. But soon, Peter had an idea for a game based on theme park rides, and was always fascinated of how it works. So he decided to visit a bunch of theme parks all over the world, along with a group of developers taking on roller coaster rides and how it works. Peter stated that his inspiration was Alton Towers in the United Kingdom and California's Great America in Los Angeles, and even asked park owners of how the parks laid out, which was a fun time gathering a lot of research about it. Peter stated that he wanted to avoid the mistakes of his earlier business simulation game, The Entrepreneur, and also wanted to create a business simulation game and make it fun so that people would want to play it. in an interview, he explained the primary reason he created Theme Park was because he wanted players to create their dream theme park. Another reason is he wanted players to understand the kind of work running one entails. The 3 difficulty settings enable players to choose the depth, simply having fun creating a theme park, or making all the business decisions too. Molyneux stated that the most difficult part to program was the visitors' behavior. After going on to so many roller coaster rides and decided to make it a cartoonish style, they eventually got started making the game. The story was originally to have the player play the role of a nephew who had inherited a fortune from his aunt to be spent only on the world's largest and most profitable theme park. But the story was ultimately scrapped for unknown reasons we may never know. The graphics were made using 3D Studio. Molyneux stated that each person takes about 200 bytes of memory, enough for them to have their own personality, and sound effects were sampled from real parks. Molyneux explained that they were going for as much realism as possible. There was to be a feature where a microphone is placed on a visitor and so the player could hear what they were saying, and multiplayer mode that would have let players send thugs to other parks, but was dropped 2 weeks prior to release because of a deadline. Theme Park took roughly a year and a half to develop. The game was mostly complete by January 1994 and scheduled for a release on March 28th, but this was pushed back in June, and then August. When it eventually released in Europe for the MS-DOS and Amiga in 1994, it received critical acclaim. The gameplay, graphics, and addictiveness in particular were well received. A reviewer of Edge commented that the game is complex, but praised the detail and addictiveness. PC Gamer's Gary Whita was highly impressed with the game. He eulogized the fun factor and compared it to that of SimCity 2000. He also praised the glorious cartoony graphics and exceptional soundtrack. Theme Park was named as the PC Gamer June 1994 Game of the Month. Computer and Video Games reviewer complimented the cute graphics and described the game as fun and feature-packed. The visitors and ride animations were complimented by French magazine Joystick. However, in North America for MS-DOS in 1994 and Mac OS in 1995, it did not sell well in the United States. Molyneux hypothesized that this was because the graphics are too childish for American audiences, but still had some success many years later. Naturally, with huge success, this would eventually get home ports to consoles. From 1994 till 1996, there was 3DO, Genesis, Sega CD, Amiga CD32 exclusively in Europe, Jaguar, FM Towns exclusively to Japan, Saturn, Super NES, then years later in 2007, DS, and in 2011, iOS. But the one we're going to talk about is obviously the PlayStation. Before the PS1 port was almost released, Bullfrog was bought by Electronic Arts in early January 1995. Thus, EA published the PAL and Japan port, while Bullfrog still managed to publish the North America port. When the PlayStation port was released in North America in October 20th, 1995, Europe in October 30th, 1995, and Japan in December 29th, 1995, it received very positive reception and was very close to the original PC game. Unfortunately, I can't find any reviews or comments for the PlayStation port. The closest to actually mentioning the port was GamePro. comparing the PlayStation and Saturn versions, saying you decide every detail, right down to the roller coaster speed. Simple graphics and sounds offer up little treats to keep the game interesting. Overlapping menu systems force you to read the manual. But in Japan, it became a hit and sold 85,000 copies within weeks in 1997. But wait, you say, didn't you say it was released in December 29, 1995 in Japan? Why yes, I did. But here's something that you didn't know, that 2 years later, the game got a Japanese remake in April 11th, 1997 for PlayStation and Saturn. Meaning that everything had to be changed, like switching the cartoonish style to be more anime style. Some objects like trees, food stands, and rides had to be redesigned. And finally, the visuals had to be more appealing to Japanese audiences. But the gameplay still remains the same. And overall, it turned out well. Now with that information done, let's get on to the review. The graphics are good for the most parts. It's basically the exact same like the PC port. Same backgrounds, same textures, and same character sprites. But the only difference is that there's no button icons in the bottom corner. You'll have to access it by pressing the shoulder buttons. But there's one exclusive feature that was not from the original PC port, and that's the first person mode. So you may think it was a cool and neat addition, while it did back in 95, but now in present day, it really hasn't aged that well. Why? Well, take a look. So yeah, this is PlayStation graphics in its absolute worst. Like seriously, the view is totally in complete fog, the floor textures mapping fizzles out, and the polygonal objects like rides, trees, and food stands are just blocky, rough, and very ugly. Which I just can't believe they actually okayed this in the final product. Sure, it may not be a big of a deal back then, but in my personal opinion, it looks shit. Unfinished, and sort of rushed, since it feels like a last-minute thing before its PlayStation release. Really, it should have just scrapped the first-person mode altogether. No loss. The presentation is alright. You can create a name of your theme park. I called it Fartyland, haha. The FMV cutscenes look okay. To access it, you need to press on the ride by pressing the shoulder buttons, click the film icon, and there you have the scene. But it also includes an intro teleporting the family to the park by a not a Willy Wonka wannabe, and finally a game over sequence if you ran out of money and gone bankrupt. And finally, there's the agreement with another businessman trying to share half of the profit by performing a handshake. The reason why I mentioned this is that this is how real and important part about the game. It's not just building your own park, it's also about making a profit by making people happy, and being the big boss at your own park, just like real-life theme park owners. However, after the original, they didn't add this feature again in future titles, which is just a shame, because that could have balanced the game's difficulty of just being the boss and make business decisions of profit, but oh well then. The music is meh. To be honest, I really don't like this type of music, and I know most theme park games do needs to have generic theme park music to fit the tone, which is fine. I'm not complaining to have a kick-ass soundtrack, but still, I don't like it that much. And finally, the gameplay. Now, normally what I usually do is talk about every single aspect, like controls, levels, and difficulty of the game. Unfortunately, I didn't make it this far because I was stuck on the United Kingdom level for over an hour or two and got a game over. Now, I know I'm trying my hard best to figure out what I'm doing wrong, but no matter what, I still managed to receive the short end of the rating. Call me idiot, but I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing, and I can't play the game for long because I have other PS1 games to do. And I know you see the same rides, food stands, and trees. There are more, but I need to unlock them, but I can't. Like I said before, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. So here is a demo of it, and you can tell there are roller coasters, spooky mansions, go-karts, and more trees. So yeah, there you go. Now on to the conclusion. The port is okay to say at least. It surely does resemble to the actual PC port, but that's what it's going for. Actually playing a game with a controller, I might add you, is slow and painful to control and should have been played with a mouse. Which actually Sony did make a PlayStation mouse and was released in North America in 1995, but that was released a few days after Theme Park and is not compatible with the mouse, which kinda sucks. But don't worry, we are going to use the mouse in the next video. One last thing that I forgot to mention, that if you add in so many things to your park, or if it's the visitors, the frame rate drops down in quality from 30 to sort of like 15 or 13. This is the same thing that happens in the PC version, but I think the console versions are even worse, since they're in inferior hardware compared to home computers. But hey, what can you do at the time? After the first game, the series made 2 sequels, which are Theme Park World, or Sim Theme Park if you live in America, which we will talk about the PS1 port in the future, and Theme Park Inc., which is actually the last game made by Bullfrog until they eventually shut down their studio in 2001 by EA. Go figure. And 2 spin-off titles, which are Theme Hospital, which again we'll discuss the PS1 port in the future, and Theme Aquarium, a game even though got a PS1 port, never saw an official release in North America, either console or computer. As for Bullfrog themselves, they would later and go on to make one of the best PC games in 1997, Dungeon Keeper, but had some very tough regulations with EA, setting Bullfrog under pressure to release the game in 6.5 weeks, which has actually had some relation to another game Bullfrog was making, High Octane: The Track Fights Back, which also managed to get a PlayStation port in 1995. But that's for another story, for another history/review. So with that, the original PC version is a good game and a must-play if you like simulation games. But the PlayStation port, I give my official rating a 3 out of 6. Next time on the PlayStation years, we be taking on another PC game ported to the PlayStation console. This time, it's an RTS game, and was the first North American game to be compatible with the PlayStation mouse. What is that game? Well, I'll tell you in the next review. Thanks for watching.